Before we dive into the details of how we configure things on servers, we first need to know how the UCS system was designed to be. So what were the initial design thoughts that the UCS team had when they came up with this product? So the UCS is not like any other server product, meaning servers do not work when you buy them. So when I boot up my system, my servers are down. And you can see that as well. Here, if I go into my chassis, if I go into a server, let me get out of the way here. If you see here, the server says it's in an unassociated state, and the option to boot the server or shut it down is grayed out. So it's just not possible to boot the server right now. So that's weird, right? We discovered everything, the network connectivity is okay. We explained how to do those network connectivity issues. Of course, we need to do that in every Blade system, but usually you could start using the Blade right now. But because of the complex networking configuration of the UCS, and because of other things, other design thoughts, we cannot boot the server right out of the box. So why is that not possible? A UCS system is designed to be stateless. That was the initial design goal. We want to make stateless server environments. What happens if a switch breaks in a network? I RMA the switch, I get a new one, I place it in, I connect my cables, restore configuration, and I'm good to go. What happens if a server breaks? If a server breaks, I can get a new server. If I get that new server, I need to reinstall the operating system, I need to install all my drivers, or if I have a backup, I restore the backup, but that backup sees that I have all kinds of new motherboards, new NICs, new BIOS versions, new everything. So it needs to redo and reinstall everything. So that is some kind of supported. So I still need to assign them for where the OS is located, because the OS can be located everywhere, locally on the disk or something like that. But it's still, I need to set some settings for the server that has to do with this stateless configuration. So you do not need to bother by how do I install ESXi, because that will be installed for you. But the design goal of this is it's stateless, meaning I need to do some things before I can power up my server. I will not use onboard settings to use in my server configuration. That was the goal. We do not use hardware settings. And just like OS installations, we prefer not to use local OS installations. So we point the UCS to a remote storage array, for example, to boot its OS from. So we do not use hardware settings. That's the first thing. If I do not use hardware settings, what settings do I need to set for a system to come online? Because there are always things in hardware, that identifiers that I have that need to be set. In a typical server, what are my hardware settings? First of all, the motherboard contains a UUID. So a UUID is just a system identifier for the whole server. Every system has a UUID. That's the first hardware setting. Second, I have all kinds of network adapters. So my network adapters have MAC addresses. If I change a server or a network card breaks or anything and I replace that, some policies might break, or at least the network will see a new MAC address coming online. My switch port configuration may be different because of that. Doesn't really care much about it, of course. But for Fibre Channel, that's much more important, because there maybe my zoning database, that ACL that I have for my disk, is based on worldwide port names. So a worldwide port name is comparable to a MAC address in the Ethernet world. So for Ethernet, that's not very important, the MAC address. But for Fibre Channel, the worldwide port name is where I will that I will commonly use to base my zoning off. So if I replace the server or I replace a HBA or a CNA, excuse me, I need to redo my zoning. So that's a large impact, a big impact for if I replace that CNA. Now, besides having a worldwide port name, I also have a worldwide node name. Per CNA, I have a worldwide node name. So this is per port, so per VNIC. So each VNIC that I create on a Palo card will get a MAC address assigned. This is per VHBA. And this is per CNA. So per physical adapter, I have one worldwide node name. So these are the settings that I first of all need to set. I can manually configure this. I can use the system IDs that I have for my server that I can then keep in the configuration, and if I replace that, I reuse those numbers. But these are worldwide unique, right? MAC addresses are usually allocated from a factory. UUIDs are factory allocated. So these are worldwide unique. What this causes is that in a UCS system, MAC addresses are only locally unique. So if you're configuring multiple UCS systems, pay attention to how you configure your MAC addresses. So these will definitely not be unique in the world, but do we really care? As long as it's unique within the data center, right? That's the most important thing. As long as it's unique within the VLAN, even, or in the vSAN. It only has a little bit of local significance. That it's worldwide unique, I don't really care about that. So that's why they chose, we don't care about the uniqueness, we care about locally significance. So these are, first of all, settings that I really need to have before I can power on my server. So therefore, I cannot power on the server right away, because I need to set that. And there are a lot of other settings that I need to do. What are other settings that I need to think about? Well, first of all, we need to set network configuration. We need to set HBA or fiber channel configuration. So what VLANs does the system has the system access to? To which vSAN has it access to? How much VNICs do I want to create? Very important things. How do I boot the server? There's no real default in how I boot a server. So do I boot it from local hard disks that are in the system? Then how do I want to configure these disks? If I have 2 or 5 or 10 disks in the system, I might want to do some RAID controller configuration. I might want to boot from Fibre Channel or from iSCSI. All these settings, I need to set boot targets. As well as here, iSCSI, I need to set some IP addresses. I need to set targets. All kinds of things that I need to do before my configuration will work. What's also meaning about stateless, I just want to rip and replace a server. So I want to take out a server, insert a new one, it gets its settings applied, and it can run exactly the same as the previous server. So all these settings I want to set. Usually you go into your BIOS window, that blue screen, where I configure all kinds of these settings. So in a normal server, I would configure Fibre Channel, boot targets, disks and stuff. But in the UCS, the goal is to do everything via the GUI, to do everything via the UCS manager. So boot policy. BIOS settings. How many processor cores do I want to use? Do I want to have memory checks? Do I want to enable serial ports? Do I want to enable USB ports? BIOS settings that I configure via that blue screen, I want to maybe set that via a GUI. Like we said, RAID controller settings, also very important to set. And all kinds of other things that I need to set here. Most of these settings will be pretty much static. If I configure a boot policy once, that's probably never going to change for a server. It's going to boot from this indefinitely. If I set a BIOS setting, sometimes I might need to change that, but 99% of the time that will stay the same. Same as for a RAID controller. I probably want to keep that equal to how it is currently. But for networking, I have a lot of changes in this. I add VLANs all the time. So, or I maybe even add network cards at some point, but adding VLANs is the most common change. Every time I add a VLAN, I need to change my VNIC configuration. So it would be beneficial if I can do that in a centralized way for maybe all of my servers, and that it automatically updates. So for all these things, the UCS takes that into account when configuring your server.